Alright you guys, hello and welcome to another video. So today's video is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little off the cuff. It was completely unplanned. It is the third installment in my Myth Bust Monday series, and this topic was sort of just thrown at me out of left field. Not because it was random, but because I was not expecting it. I had something else planned, but I figured why not cover it right now. So we are just going to dive in straight away. We're currently in Hermosa Beach, California. I was just out for sort of a morning stroll after my online IG Live workout this morning. And as you can tell, a little bit disheveled, a little bit of a mess. That hair is gonna go under a hat shortly. But before I do, I'm gonna let you know what we're talking about today. So the topic is gonna be, how fast do I lose muscle when I no longer have the gym, or when I'm no longer working out like I used to. So maybe I'm not using weights like I used to, maybe I'm just doing body weight stuff, but basically I'm going to talk all about detraining and how fast you can lose those hard-earned gains. Now, before we enter the office and have that sit-down chat like usual, I figured you guys don't want to listen to me talk and just stare at my face for 10 minutes, so I'm going to go get some sweet B-roll. If you need to, always option to modify this down to something lighter. We can go with a single dumbbell. We can go with no dumbbell at all. The topic today is one that is sort of highly debated right now. A lot of content creators are also doing videos on this because it's something that we all really want to know about. And that is, how long does it take to start losing muscle after you leave the gym? As always, we're going to take a scientific approach. So we're going to dive right in and see what the science says. I'm going to do my best to break it down for you guys, and then at the end, we're going to decide together what we think of it all. So when it comes to investigating how long it takes for detraining to take place, it's important to consider a couple factors. And first and foremost on the list is, what are you doing during your detraining time? In other words, what is your activity like? Because there can be a big difference between one person's lifestyle and another, and a lot of it depends on variables that may or may not be within your control. On the most extreme end of the spectrum, when it comes to activity level, you have a complete bed rest. And by complete bed rest, I mean no regular household activities, no going to work, no doing chores. You're simply lying in bed and doing nothing other than breathing and staying alive for the entire day. I discovered a 2016 study by Dirks and colleagues that tested exactly this. They took 10 individuals, they put them on absolute bed rest for a 1-week time period with the goal of testing just how much muscle the body can lose in a 1-week time period with absolutely no activity. And what they found was the body can actually lose muscle mass incredibly fast when in a state of complete rest. These individuals on average lost about 1.2 kilograms, or in pounds, about 4 pounds of lean body tissue, so specifically muscle mass, not water weight, not muscle glycogen, but pure muscle mass in that 1-week time period. Now, the next step up from complete bed rest is sort of what I already alluded to, and just, moving around the house, doing your chores, walking to the bus stop to go to work, what have you. Not physical, not programmed physical activity, but simply what you have to do on a day-to-day basis. And a later study in 2017 by Hong and colleagues tested 20 individuals, and they put them through a period of training for a month-long period, a period of detraining for 2 weeks, and then a period of retraining for an additional month. The difference between these two studies was during that detraining period, that 2-week period in the middle, these candidates were allowed to just go about the rest of their normal routine. They could do those chores, they could walk to the bus stop, they could go to their work. They didn't have to stay on complete bed rest.
And this study was testing, again, how much muscle mass would be lost, whether they found any decreases in strength when those individuals came back for their retraining period after that 2 weeks off. And what they found was actually there was very little to no appreciable muscle loss and no decrease in strength for the most part, minor fluctuations. But all things being equal, these individuals were able to come off of their detraining period, jump right back in, and discover that they had lost very little strength or size.
What about a detraining scenario where maybe you don't have to completely stop your fitness training regimen, but you have to greatly reduce it, or you find yourself just in circumstances that are going to cause you to be very inconsistent in your ability to hit the gym? Are there better and worse training methods when it comes to slowing down the rate of detraining, halting detraining altogether, or maybe even circumventing any loss of fitness and continuing to push towards your goals?
Assuming you're able to continue training at some level, the most logical advice, at least in my opinion, would be to continue training, even if it's at a reduced volume, in the most similar fashion to how you were training before, in the hopes of reducing the rate at which your body is detrained. In investigating this a little further, I looked at a study by Fisher and colleagues that basically focused on different types of resistance training and whether or not there was any appreciable difference as far as response to muscle growth and muscle strength and performance. Now, what they ultimately concluded was the most important factor in making sure that you maintained your muscle size and your muscle strength wasn't so much the method by which you strength trained, i.e. it didn't matter so much whether you used free weights versus machines or even body weight, but what the most important factor was intensity. So long as you were pushing your body, your muscles to the point of failure, or at least to the point that you were pushing before by whatever method you were using, that you would maintain your muscle size and your muscle strength. So in other words, intensity over method in this case. So if training intensity trumps training method, what other factors might be important when it comes to limiting the level and rate of detraining that our body undergoes? I want to focus on two additional factors, that being your training volume and your training frequency. So your training volume is going to equate to the amount of sets and reps that you do in a particular session, whereas your training frequency is going to refer to the amount of sessions that you do in a given time period. Let's call it a week in this case. Now, as someone that tends to operate under the philosophy of more is always better, I was actually very interested to see what the scientific literature had to say on this particular topic. In one 2011 study that I investigated, there were two groups of candidates that were taken in for this study, and they were put on a training program for a 15-week period. One group was training continuously for that 15-week period, and the second group took a 6 weeks on, 3 weeks off approach to those 15 weeks. Now, training volume, meaning the amount of sets and reps that these individuals were doing per session, was exactly the same, regardless of whether they were training continuously or that on-off cycle. And what they ended up finding at the end of this whole 15-week period was that the two groups tended to perform very, very similarly, i.e. muscle mass that was gained was about the same between the two groups, and strength that was gained was about the same between the two groups. In fact, it was even a little bit better in both categories in the group that trained less, the 6 weeks on, 3 weeks off group. So what I concluded, and what the studiers concluded from this particular experiment, was that there is a point of diminishing returns when it comes to the relationship between volume and frequency. So finding the sweet spot between training intensity, frequency, and volume is going to be optimal for increasing your muscle size, muscle strength, and muscle performance. Then what is going to be the minimum requirement in all of those categories if one is looking to either limit or avoid detraining altogether? One final study that I took a look at by Bickle and colleagues tested exactly this. They took a large group of individuals and put them on a training regimen for a 16-week time period, and then took 32 weeks, so double the training period, and reduced training volume over the course of that 32-week time period. Now, the groups could either be reduced to a 1/3 of their overall training volume or all the way down to a 1/9 of their overall training volume. And what they found at the end of this study was that the group that had been reduced down to a 1/3 training volume actually continued to gain muscle size and muscle strength over the course of those 32 weeks. The group that was on the 1/9 training volume actually was able to maintain largely all of the muscle size and the muscle strength that they had gained previously in the prior 16-week time period.
The final variable that we're going to consider here is your diet, your overall calorie consumption, and the role of protein when it comes to the detraining process.
When considering your protein consumption, you want to make sure that you're getting adequate levels of protein, even more so during a time of detraining than during a time when maybe your training is a bit more normal. Now, the reason behind this is because protein consumption is directly linked to a process that we call muscle protein synthesis. Now, if you know anything about how the body builds muscle, it's really an interaction between two opposing processes. One is called muscle protein breakdown, and that is basically the damage that you do to your muscle fibers when you're doing a strength training session in the gym, versus muscle protein synthesis, which is the rebuilding and strengthening process that takes place when the body is allowed to rest and recover between sessions, assuming that your protein intake is adequate. Now, muscle protein synthesis is driven by the physical activity that you do in the gym. The process of lifting those weights releases signals that stimulate the process of muscle protein synthesis. In a series of detraining where your training volume is lowered, your intensity is lowered, or maybe you are in a state of complete immobilization and you're on bed rest, obviously you don't have as much or maybe that external stimuli at all. In which case, the body has to rely even more on protein intake, which is a secondary form of muscle protein synthesis. Over time, without the physical exercise, your body is going to become increasingly resistant to the effects of protein on stimulating muscle growth, and it may fall into the trap of muscle atrophy, or the decrease in size and strength that tends to take place with disuse. So, studies have shown that by simply increasing your protein intake, you can further stimulate muscle protein synthesis and decrease the rate at which muscle is lost and potentially halted altogether. So to tie this all together, answering the question of how fast the body loses muscle during a period of detraining really comes down to just a handful of factors. First and foremost is going to be your activity level. There's obviously going to be tremendous benefits over just staying lightly active versus complete bed rest, and there's going to be even more benefits still to maintaining some sort of training regimen, even if that regimen is training of a different kind than you're used to, and even if the volume and the frequency is much, much lower than what you're used to. In addition to that, your overall calorie consumption, maintaining that close to a maintenance level, is going to be key, and your protein consumption, making sure that that stays high, maybe even higher than your training levels, is going to be equally key as well.
And that's going to be our wrap for this one. As always, my friends, thanks so much for tuning in and watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification. It really does help me out a lot. Follow me on social media at Stephen Har Fitness, and I will see y'all in the next video.